Sie betreten Incubator Nummer 7, ein Hochsicherheitsgedankenexperiment. Verlassen Sie nicht die angezeigte Route. Besucher 758 wird getestet. Jetzt!
Happy New Year, Andreas. I'm here with Andreas, direct connection to Ankara. And today the reason to make a little podcast was an article from Lars-Henrik Gass in context about the future of cinema. And the title is also The Future of Cinema, or in German Zukunftskino. And he presented the idea that in his view, the future of cinema is to be musealisiert, so to become a museum, when we can translate it. And that's our starting point, but I thought it would be super interesting at first to ask you, Andreas, what does it mean to be a museum or to become a museum? Because for me, myself, I'm a kind of... on the one hand, I love museums, as a kid, and I went often to museums. But over the years, I realized there are kind of a certain narrative about a museum, about his mission, and why is museums important, because, there's also a lot of money which goes in to build them and to curate them. But when we think about the history, and that's the point I found quite interesting, there's a kind of, sadness about museums, a kind of, more critical view. What's the essence, the quality of a museum when we can reconstruct it from their history? And so I would like at first probably to start what your experiences, personal, with museums. So there's the one hand, and on the other hand, what you think is the mission of a museum, or do you have yourself, problems or kind of critical about museums? What's the, I would say, like in Jungian psychology, you have, the daily phase or the daily figure of something, and then there's another side, a dark side, like a kind of unconscious aspect, which nobody wants to talk about. And you think, okay, but what's the truth about this institution? What does it mean?
Yeah, okay, I will not talk about the night at the museum, because I didn't spend the night at the museum in this sense. This is a lot of stuff you're putting in there in front of me. This is to talk about Lars-Henrik Gass and how this comes with, because of the article and the story also I have in connection with him, and how we are connected in some way. Mm-hmm. But on the other side, to start on museums, and we both were, I was for a long time in Munich, so living for 12 years in Munich, and one of the greatest events was I met or I've seen when I was before that, I think I was 14 or 15, was Deutsche Museum. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was something incredible. The machines, the experiments, the demonstrations they did, and stuff like that. I was just like, the ears were flying in the sense, like Dumbo. A little bit kind of this kind of thing we have in that. But that's so long time ago. The other thing is, maybe, I don't know, have you ever been in Cologne in the Museum Ludwig?
Sure. I grew up, near Cologne. So
yeah, of course. And Museum Ludwig is, for example, Jean Tinguely's Babaluba, this little machine, crazy machine, which makes various noises and stuff like that. And because of, there's a relation between me and the artist, because I wrote when I was a kid to Jean Tinguely and asked him why he's making these machines. Mm-hmm. Asked him what are these and what is he's saying about this. And he wrote me back, and I still have the letter. Yeah, it's framed at the wall and stuff like that. And I've seen the machines from him first live there. Yeah, and it was incredible. Or another, what is museum you go into here in Ankara, if you would have the chance to come to Ankara. Everyone, it's a very crazy city. Everyone says it's very boring, stuff like that. But it has one of the richest richest spaces you can imagine in Turkey, and this is the Museum of the History of Anatolian Civilizations. And there is the story of Gilgamesh in man-high stones, yeah, and this is incredible, yeah, and there are these kind of artifacts, yeah, but so there's this kind of relationship there. And there's one more thing, it's like they have objects in there, they have this size, yeah. And a friend and I went in there and we looked around, and then we seen these little tablets, stone tablets from Kune tablets, about 2,000, 3,000 years out, Mesopotamia, something like that. And they really look like smartphones, yeah. And you get that, wow, these are the first smartphones in world history. So these are kind of connections for our generation, yeah. You think like, yeah, I would make them personally, or you would remember some of the museum, stuff like that. But how is that with cinema? That's when Lars Henrik Gus put this article up, when I read this article, and it was on the web and was shared and stuff like that, and there was this subtone of there's a crisis in German cinema, yeah, and the crisis of the ministry and whatever didn't put too much money in there, money went into other places. So what happens to the cinema owners, yeah? I have an old friend I'm talked to for a long time, or actually the director in the very first film I acted, he owns a cinema in Siegen, yeah? And so following his Facebook and all this kind of stuff, so you get this kind of idea what is going on there. And when I looked at Lars Henrik's suggestion, then I was like, first, okay, yeah, it's obvious, because a cinema is not actually the building cinema, and the business cinema is not making money with films, really, yeah. It's making money with popcorn, yeah. And this is so, if the films are not attractive, and then you can't sell the popcorn, and then you can't sell, you're getting more money from this kind of stuff. So it was a little bit sad in that sense. And the second thing is that, okay, where do I watch films? And to be honest, I watch Netflix, and I got Amazon Prime now because I wanted to see this Philip K. Dick series, Man on the High Castle. Yeah? And so streaming becomes a little bit more like that cinema. So what I did is I called Lars Henrik Gus, and I invited him for our own festival to talk to our students and about his ideas about what will happen. So what would you tell students now? Is it becoming what he asked for, a cinema museum? Is that the same thing like the Frankfurt Film Museum, or in Munich, like I don't know, I love it still a lot. Munich Film Museum was, I watched all Fassbinders in there after it really took me time to stand through the first ones, but then I watched lots of Westerns there, and I spent a wonderful session with Axel Block there to watch Rumblefish Silence without sound. Yeah. So
why?
Huh?
Why? Just to have more focus on the movie, because I love also Rumblefish, or because something was broken?
No. Just because of going reel by reel to concentrate on the cinematography.
Sure. Okay. Makes sense.
Concentrate on the light and the framing, and then Axel talking about it, like saying, okay, look at this shot and that shot. It's like, did you took classes from Helmut Färber, the film history?
Yeah, I took, and he threw me out. Because I love Axel Block, and when he starts to talk about cinema and special, framing, it was always great. And my problem with Mr. Färber, I totally love him, so nothing personal.
Yeah, no problem.
But I remember the situation, for me, it was too much cathedral, too much priesthood. And so for me, my impulse or the fascination and charisma of cinema it's something lively. I remember we saw Griffith's Intolerance.
Well.
Yeah, and the problem is we sat in the cinema, we looked at the screen, And then in the background was like so it was no sound because it's a silent movie. And so I started to enact it. And I was like commenting, oh, do you have a new head? Oh, that looks good. And so I started to play acting. That wasn't serious enough. And then he asked me, please, to be silent or to leave. And I don't know exactly what I did. My option was otherwise to fall asleep.
You have this kind of what I had trouble in film school was some of the stuff as well, was the holy space of cinema, and on the other side the performative space. Like what I loved was at the student film festival, there was Irving Kershner was there, and it was after midnight was Star Trek. So sitting with a six-pack in the first row and talk like hell about a great movie, you know, and have fun. And Irving Kershner really enjoyed it. Yeah, he was cool in that way. So different things. But on the other side, I enjoyed also this holy Griffiths moment in some letters. The thing with this space is, if this space is gone, so what is cinema? And that's a long chapter. And where does cinema move on? And I in general, also what I'm writing is like cinema moved on. And with Lars Henrik Gus saying like, okay, is he talking about that every city has now to have a kind of a space like which is called the film museum? Yeah. And does it mean that the state has to take care of that? What is now actually cinema is and films are cultural artifacts by UNESCO now. It's accepted as a cultural artifact. So will they store now 600-meter reels, bobbies of 35mm copies, and then we go there and then we will watch a 35mm copy at that place and. Or is it something like the Eye in Amsterdam? Yeah, which I mean is a fantastic place. Yeah, it's the Eye in Amsterdam is just a cool place, a wonderful restaurant. Yeah, with a huge view, and an archive which is incredible, and a kind of a living, interactive entertainment space. But actually, it's a nice architecture with a big restaurant in it. Yeah, for concerts and stuff like that. So. I don't know. The question is for us all, what do we do with that? Yeah, and when he says he's a film festival organizer, it's the oldest short film festival in the world, maybe. Yeah, it is very famous. Yeah, and they made a very clear decision that they go with their festival online because of COVID, like the Munich documentary film festival, and that was not so bad. And I really appreciated that the sales, the Munich Documentary Film Festival shared the sales with the cinema owners. Yeah, I mean that was something. I was saying like, wow, that's a nice gesture. But at the other side, I was sad because it's like there's in Germany der Tropfen auf dem heißen Stein. Yeah, so you're tripping on it, but it's already gone and. But we're already talking about cinema dying since years and years and years. There's one problem with the whole thing, what Lars proposes, is that cinema is never, or film is not a static object. Yeah, it's not something what you collect and place like Gilgamesh stone. Yeah, you don't look at it like this. You have to create the atmosphere around it, the screening. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But I would like, I think that I have a little different view with your comparison with Gilgamesh and cinema. I would say it's super reasonable and it makes totally sense with what Oliver Gus is saying, like we need now museums. But for me, in a bigger picture of a cultural development, that means there's no future for cinema. So museum is like the same with the Gilgamesh moment. We are, and I think that's a little bit a problem or an aspect of cinema which we should not forget is the moment that what you told at the beginning, it's kind of a transfer of knowledge. It's kind of a societal memory. So all the archives and institutions, also libraries, the Deutsche Nationalbibliothek and other, are like, that's the moment where our society has created kind of tomb, like where time stops. So it's for eternity. So that's the idea. And it's
Can I interrupt? Yeah. So when you say kind of tomb, you know what is incredible in Munich is like you have the Alte Pinakothek, the Neue Pinakothek, yeah, and you have the Egyptian Museum, which is the tomb of the Munich Film School, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely, and but that's the character that we established. It's also super interesting that the modern museum we how we know it. That's another aspect is only 100, 200 years old. This open space and people go there. So beginning with the French Revolution, and I checked out with my roommate who is from Italy, and we found out, for example, the Uffizi started only like 1911. So before this, it was in the hand of the rich and powerful, like the Borghese and all the different names. So that's a first step, and now it's become kind of public domain in the sense that we all in a democratic society say, what are our valuables? So there's another aspect that museums are like treasure chests. In earlier time, somebody had a war and then they brought all the good stuff from the temples and gold and whatever with them and put them in the treasure chest or the room of the king. And it's super interesting that it's, I think, an incredible important connection also to ideology. So the conviction, the religion. So I like it, for example, in Athens, the great Parthenon. There was the statue of Athena, but there was all the gold also of Athens. So there's kind of the treasure chest, which needs societal consciousness, which we today probably call ideology, religion, something where a certain society says that's important for us, that's valuable. And so that's two functions. The one is like we are rich. So the point of the Louvre is not to see the simple one picture after the next, because it's always a paradox in a museum. You go in and say, who can see it? No, it's exactly the effect that there are hundreds and thousands of the best stuff. So I go in as a Frenchman or as a German, in the Alte Pinakothek or Neue Pinakothek, and suddenly there's a connection between kind of thymos. When Sloterdijk is talking about thymos, about proudness, it's like, oh, the Deutsche Museum, with all the technical stuff. So knowledge is another part of riches, secret languages, when you are successful in a society, and oh, that's Munich, or that's Germany, and we have the Rubens or the Leonardo or the Rembrandt, and so. And we have a nice architecture around it, and it's like, no, it's something very local, like and important for identities. Also, when you don't go into the museum, just the fact they're, like a temple in a way. So there's a memory aspect.
It's for us, but it's for us a kind of a responsibility of the state to keep that, yeah. So this is like as a German, if you think about it, one of the state responsibilities is to give you this kind of security feeling that these artifacts of your history or your identity, not history, are kept and stored, yeah. And for I think some of the films, like I mentioned Fassbinder, I could mention Heimat, I could mention even newer films, even Fatih Akın's films or something, they are becoming this kind of cultural identification objects. Yeah,
absolutely. And so, coming back to your Gilgamesh example, in the time when these statues were standing in a city, there weren't artifacts. They were an important part of the scenery, the city, the temple. I don't know exactly, but
it's like Waterloo, like Piccadilly Circus, or some place in London, like shows of power and influence, and state and governmental organizations.
Absolutely. In this situation, it was like the normality. It was that this is what we are. So presentation of power. And then in the process of history, all this stuff, these artifacts got extracted. So also the Gilgamesh. So that's another interesting aspect of museums, that they are a total process of decontextualization. So a culture is dead. Now, after thousands of years, they found probably the statues. Archaeologists found them, brought them back to the museum. And then it's also super interesting suddenly, for example, in Turkey, you have the aspect, now we probably rewrite our story in a sense that we suddenly, put in the Hittites as like a predecessor. You know what I mean?
Yeah, last year was the year of Göbekli Tepe, as 9,000 years before Christ. So it's like the first beer brewery in the world, but you cannot say it like this. It's like we're not proud of that the beer was done there. It's so proud of. It's like a point for where Western civilization might have started, settlement.
Yeah, super important. Yeah, the same when people found, new forms of the Homo sapiens somewhere, like earlier human times. Now we are the starting point of human civilization. And
the truth, this what the feeling you're expressing regarding museums, where I'm getting stuck mainly is because of this feeling that this is still like a modern kind of an experience or act or settlement or setting or putting up as an architect, because it is so 19th century. Yeah, it is so exhibiting, showing, putting artifacts together. And that's something where you think you already it's only 120 years or only 140 years, 150 years. When was the first World Fair? 1880 or something like that? I don't know. So it's just still continuing like this, yeah?
Coming back to the article, the future of cinema, where I can imagine the same with classical statues. We can bring it into the museum because it has lost its living context. That's the point which I mean. So certain stuff is in a culture which is lively and it's normal. Yeah, here's the statues, here's a temple, this and that and the other. And then 500,000 years later, or only 100 years later, we say, that's kind of, do we throw it away or do we have a value for it? But it's a certain context is lost. And so I can totally see that we also take cinema and bring it into a place, the reels, and then like in a film museum. I love the Frankfurt Film Museum and also the Munich one. And then you have the possibility to revisit them. But it's in a kind, how you told also with Netflix, is that with this decontextualization, we are kind of, at least I realized it, we suddenly starting to equate the works of art or a film just for themselves. So, for example, a classical thing is like pictures of Mary with Jesus in a church. Mm-hmm. And that's a totally different context and lively context when you have a Christian culture like 17th, 15th century, and the relationship between the picture and the people who are kneeling or praying or looking at it, it's totally different than ours. And we really have to have a lot of work to, when we really want to say, okay, what did it mean in this time? Not only the subject, but what was the emotion and what were the rituals and why did some pictures were praised and other were like, okay, it's fine. Yeah, why Botticelli Madonnas and not other painters from Florence. And so there's something lost. And what I mean with cinema, I think one aspect that the business model isn't working anymore is that in the 19th century, there was a model of distribution which was more successful than theater. Suddenly you can have like the reproductive element. I can, make thousands of copies of a theater piece. and send it out. So that was the distribution model. And today it's internet. And then is the point, okay, which part of cinema, how you correctly ask, do we want to save? And can we really save it? So what do we save? Because suddenly, it's an object to be looked at and to analyzed. But it's a little bit like that this kind of object are drawn into this museum space like sleeping beauties. And once a while, like little Andreas or little Sigmar go in and we awake because we got inspiration from it.
It's like you go to the Staatstheater to watch an opera, yeah?
Yeah.
You go to the opera, yeah? Going to the opera in that sense, to go there, to have the specific evening, the specific time, isolated, all that, to get immersed. I mean, it's about immersing yourself in a public space, yeah, into actually, again, something very lonely, but you're in a public space around with everyone else doing the same kind of immersive reading, yeah. And when you look at it, what we have now, what's happening, and I think in Germany is still sleeping in many ways, and because maybe television is still so dominated, and especially state television is so dominant, that the layered digital stack above it, the layers which are the cloud and the operations of the cloud, they're already they're there, accessible, but they're not used by all generations in the same way. And the generation which is my students now uses that much different than me, myself, and I. Let's not make that joke, but and that way. But it means also that when you tell it, you have a talk about cinema, you have a specific narrative model in your mind. You are already conditioned by a Hollywood model, which gets obsolete right now. Yeah, maybe many of these films now, Hollywood gets on this blockbuster market and tries to go through these blockbusters, which doesn't work anymore. This kind of Captain America kind of concepts, which were 5 years ago strong, but might not work anymore today in some matters. And there's a very specific model of telling stories, and that comes very much close to, okay, I love Verdi, okay, I love all these kind of things, and I listened. There was 250 years of Beethoven, and we have that, but we will lose several films. We might talk about them today, and we will gain some of objects which are becoming objects, not subject, they're becoming object. Yeah. So there's this kind of twist in it, but when you think about this, what is film for you, then we don't lose that, because that will take place and moves on with the stuff we have around. So this mediatization of the society, I'm not sure if this is a democratization of media tools. I think it's a mediatization of society, but which gives the ability or the possibility to mediate to everyone, but does not give the possibility of telling to everyone. And telling is the part, I mean, Netflix is nothing else than, for me, than the video store I had around the corner in Schwabing, yeah, and around the corner in Giesing. And maybe what Lars Henrik does, when we talk about it, the museum image might be not the model of museum we have in mind, might be the right thing. Maybe it's a mixture between a bookstore, a library, and a video store, where you have this possibility. You go in your Plex tuxedo to this huge, cool event. Yeah, you have this kind of figures, influences, yeah, which appearing for a moment. So you have the joy, the pleasure, a kind of. In Turkish, I would use the word çıplak. It means nakedness of cinema, and an image again. So an image which represents another image in that way. Yeah. So I think the point where we are is there's so many discussions going across that. Yeah. I mean, it just says to take care of this culture at some part that gives the meaning of going to the film. Yeah, not like Netflix is coming to you. No, we are going to the film. I think that's the this kind of physical work, which it means to go to a movie and see it. For me, one event that is it still existing in Munich? There was once the Muffathalle. I think that's about 20 years ago or so.
I think it's
Yeah.
still existing.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I watched Faust there with a French electronic band doing the soundtrack, and that was wow. Yeah, so you get this kind of experiences. So images experience another type of immersion again. So I guess we have to think about cinema as a kind of an immersive event, and that might be one part of that. I don't know. With festivals not take place like that. I mean, why should you go to all these places? Okay, we cannot go out right now. You have to be back at home. You cannot go at night in the time which would be fun to go to cinema or something like that. You can't do that. You prefer to buy yourself either a projector at home, or you prefer to buy yourself a 55-inch television, Ultra HD or Full HD, or no, 4K, pardon, UHD or 4K. And once you see the 4K image, you get sucked into a totally different world, yeah, as well at home.
Yeah. Mind it could be an opening with projectors who are not super expensive today, and with the white linen at the beginning at cinema, you just sit down somewhere in the park, put the white linen up, and have the Cinema Paradiso.
I mean,
experience.
Do you remember? Is it still existing, the Werkstattkino in Munich?
I think yes. Yeah.
The Werkstattkino had always this kind of very strange films at some parts, which I've seen very good stuff in the underground movies and stuff like that. I think you need to rescue this type of cinemas, like what is going on in Cologne with this conflict between this film club and their cinema and this art whatever organization it is and stuff like that, where Lars Henrik was responding to at one part, saying like it's a responsibility of the government to save this culture, more or less, and to save that. And I think this is a very, very German thought. Yeah, I mean, here in Turkey, nobody would think about something like that, of course. But also, I don't think in England or in the US somebody would think like that. And it's just like der Kulturauftrag, like I don't know how to translate that in English, like where the öffentlich-rechtlichen always say like you have to pay me money because I'm doing that, yeah, and this kind of stuff. So I think it's there's this bitterness in Lars Henrik's wording that the government should, from the money they're spending now, should save these institutions, yeah? Which means actually that we are completing the institutionalization of cinema as an art artifact. And that would be the completion of the circle, I guess.
Yeah, and for me, it's like kind of squaring, the circle. Because when I think about what is or was the charisma of cinema, and it's, starting that it is this popular form which wasn't recognized as art in any way, like John Ford or Orson Welles. It was like, in the golden age we talked last time. Yeah. And then you had Nouvelle Vague, some young Frenchman who tried to sneak themselves into the business, using the old guys to telling them, hey, by the way, you're a genius, Hitchcock. And Hitchcock was, what? Okay, yeah. And suddenly you can use old men as stepping stones for your own ambitions, which is totally fine. And also then in the 60s with the German cinema, so there was a try to create something in the public space, which was also super discussed. So also Wenders film, Herzog film. So we always forgot it, that in the 60s and 70s, there was not this kind of German movie, but it was super lively and, oh, the new Fassbinder and what crazy shit did he do? And today, and that's the moment, in the moment when I think it got institutionalized, and I think it's the same art or humans, when they got institutionalized, is not a good sign. Yeah. And when I imagine that there are German administrators, manager, curators, academics, and they say, okay, let us produce a movie, the result will total boredom. So I don't have any hopes, because the reason why art, that's the reason why art attracts, at least at the beginning, strange figures, because that's the only place where this kind of figures can go. Because, they're not able to have a 9-to-5 job, in earlier time homosexual. So there's suddenly somebody like Murnau is, I'm not good enough to play in the theater, like also Griffiths. Yeah, I want to be a great author of romance or theater, but there were probably better theater directors in his time. And so, other way, okay, I go to movies.
Griffiths was an actor or not? Yeah.
Also an actor, but when you don't, you have to find something different because you are strange or you can't fit in something which you want. And then you go like, okay, that's also an outcome. And suddenly 50 or 100 years later, people say, oh, that's great, that's a masterpiece, or it's problematic. And so for me, the imagination that there are people who, I think, for the system are not the most interesting people, who decide then about, a certain program, which a Kulturauftrag, which is, how you rightly said, super German, is what we are talking here about. Because the initial charisma of whatever art form is something which for me has to do with life, with excitement. You have all the people in the 70s. I wasn't old enough for it, but before the cinema, hundreds of people waiting to see the movie and also to go into the public imagination. But I think there's another thing in play, and that's, I think, the specific history of Germany. I think the film kind of was how do you say it in English, Sündenbock? It was...
that's, you have to keep it in German, I guess, but Sündenbock is... the one you blame for everything.
Yeah, and you have this cultural tragedy with the Nazi dictator. And in a way, we thought, I have a different opinion about this. We can connect to the other traditions like music and literature, Goethe, Schiller, etc. But I think all this went in flames. It's like, sure, you can talk about Faust and Goethe and Schiller or Kant, but it prevented nothing. So don't talk about me about the imperative of Kant. Didn't help. So that's one problem with, this catastrophe, with people astonished, this high culture, German science culture, and then you have the Holocaust and the war. I think the cinema... First of all, there's this book from Heiner Mühlmann, you probably read it, about Kunstkrieg. Oh, fantastic book. Because he's talking about the CIA and the propaganda of the Americans after the war. And it's more about art, how they pushed the abstract expressionism into the world to destroy the nationalist propaganda and picture programs. And till today, the effect of the Nazis, one attraction is not their politics, but their aesthetics. Yeah, so that's till today. We have only looked to Disneyland and Star Wars. They, took everything from the Nazis. And this kind of the Americans, and that's a little bit sad about Germany, that till today, especially somebody like Frau Merkel, don't recognize the importance of how to shape the public conscience or identity. And we have interesting development with the Aufarbeitung, the rememberings culture of the Holocaust. So I think that's interesting and special worldwide to have this process of thinking about a horrible catastrophe. But in this case, I think one problem was that the film was like not able to recover the German movies from this catastrophe. So that was the one who has to go. You have Riefenstahl and Fatalen, you have Goebbels who loved the movies. And everybody could like, okay, Bach or Wagner, it's not really Nazi. But, you know, there's a part, and I think that was super, and the Americans knew that's, I think, a political reason to push their movies, so their consciousness, into this defeated country, Germany, which lost, and they know and knew, and that's the reason why the Americans are so brilliant, they knew you lead wars on two planes, on the real one, so in the desert with real tanks, and the other is consciousness, so the imagination of people. But you have it already in the Bible. The reason was you go in, you kill everybody who has a consciousness, take the kids. The kids you can still model. So you go in and you have to destroy the memory. So that's the important thing. And then you have funny stories how suddenly, because you never can wipe out memories totally, they creep up again. For example, the whole superhero genres in America, that's more or less Indian mythology. The Spider-Man, the Batman. So the Westerners come in, crush the Indians, but then there are always remnants which crawl back up, and it's funny. It's like the return of the dead, which all the superhero figures, and this cosmos which has nothing to do with Christianity.
Yeah, there was just why you used that example. I mean, there was just some in the Deutschlandfunk a podcast where I think it's called Hörsaal, or a lecture about what's the difference between Americans, English, and Germans. And with Americans, and that's what reflects in Hollywood as well, is this kind of what they have, this frontier, this border. So all these stories was what you go to Star Wars, because they reach the West Coast and there's the ocean, so there's not going further. So the frontier goes somewhere else. It goes outside of Earth. And before that, all these superhero films and more or less reflect this kind of frontier character, something like that. I was the worst thing. I mean, now I can make a confession because I was in the German army in the propaganda department. Yeah, so I was a propaganda soldier, and propaganda is in a very well still was today it's called, I think, information soldiers or something, or information office or something like that. I don't know. So Americans had very clear taken concepts after the Second World War, and that's it. So I really have to read this book to see Kunstkrieg. I mean, I heard a lot about it, and as you mentioned it before, but I never read it. But there's also this part on the German side with German propaganda and this whole tradition in there. And there's this incredible disruption in Europe with the Second World War, and we're stuck with the aesthetic of Leni Riefenstahl. And we don't know how to deal with that anymore after the Holocaust, because what after that comes is the Resnais film by Nacht und Nebel, Night and Fog. Yeah, so that comes and that's burned into our conscious. Yeah, you have these two images burned into your conscious. The one is the door of Auschwitz opening. Yeah, and the other one is these naked bodies in Triumph of the Will or in Olympics. Yeah. It's Olympics from 1936, something like that. And then you have the end of the Second World War and the destruction and deconstruction of the German film industry, yeah, because there was this massive UFA, and that was a big Hollywood competition. In
Absolutely, yeah, before the war, totally,
and,
yeah.
So this industry is destructed, yeah, in that way.
Sure.
And Hollywood had no interruption, yeah. So, but it's not only in Europe, this disruption of films. It's everywhere in the world because everyone tries to get together. I mean, get the stuff together. The only ones who are ready with the film industry is the Americans. They have a continuing film industry. Everyone else has no continuing film industry. And surprised are the Italians, I guess, in that way then. So they came up, and this is neorealism, and that comes up as an alternative. So the thing at Germany and with film, and what you would talk about Sündenbock, is the question, is cinema at some part the Sündenbock there? What's happening is Germany doesn't pick up with cinema, and the Americans and the British, and I think it's because BBC and the American, what they do in Bavaria and everything, what in the, it might be related with the Marshall Plans for Europe, I'm not sure about it, but what is built is television. So you have in Germany already this television knowledge, and what comes in after the 50s and 60s is television somewhere there, and not cinema built. And okay, we have the sissy films. I mean, I love them. Yeah, I confess. I mean, they're wonderful. That is cinema. And then you have Wim and friends coming up and say, we don't want this anymore. It's the same like Godard and friends come up and say, we don't want this theater anymore, and go to Cannes and Revolution isn't there. And this just goes together with 68. And these guys from 68, they become our teachers. They are our instructors. And later, and like we teaching the next generations on that. But what is happening there, the 68, and that's what you rightly say, these films don't continue into an industry. They continue into art house and this kind of cultural niche. Yeah. So they get occupied by the öffentlich-rechtliche television, because who gives the money to make these films is das kleine Fernsehspiel. So you have to go as a filmmaker to go there, and you're going into this niche to be happy about 10,000 or viewers in a cinema and a show, and that's no reliable business model. And the big companies like New Constantine, I think the question to ask them honestly, what is your share in the German market, and what is your participation in the US market and the US production companies and stuff like that. So I think it's a way of trade. Yeah, a traitor is there. The traitor is German state television. And now, because it's, I don't know, if you want to make a film, how many institutions do you need to get together to get your thing done? And that's killing creativity, I guess. And that's, I don't know. If that's cinema, that's not cinema in that way. It's just a bad business model.
What I'm thinking is that I'm not sure if how a certain tradition, or I just say that the history of in German cinema is like tricky. The American one has, I mean, jazz and cinema in a way are the American art forms anyway. And then you have this relationship of a defeated country after the war. First thing you pick up is the old arts like music and literature, thinking that will save you in a way, or there's still any value in it. Yeah? And it's okay, how Sartre said about his book in literature, dead people and dead authors can't, say no. And so it is the educational moment. And I think that's interesting when you go to, for example, Goethe time in the theater, that I think it's interesting, or don't dismiss the idea of the economical, political, and other connection of certain art forms in the use of. And it's totally appropriate. Goethe in Weimar theater could reach every important person there in Weimar. So theater is okay for a city which is, not super big. We today would say a small city, but you can, have a conversation, build a certain culture, a public discourse about certain things. And the same with literature. so you can print them, and you can reach a lot of people, and suddenly it's important for business people, but also for political people, because they see, okay, suddenly 100 or 1,000 people can read or see something, and you have an effect. And today, for me, for example, theater, also opera, is kind of dead. But the opera in their time, it's Italy or Mozart, could be impactful because people sang the songs and it was used to build the nation, like Wagner in Germany. So it also was reflected into a public consciousness, into a society, and built something which we call identity, or our constructed history. And with cinema, that's a sad thing that, for example, I try to think which kind of German movie figures do you have? Because in American cinema, you have always, as be Simpson or comedies, you have these funny references as spoofs to other movies. And that could be reference to the 30s, to the 40s of like typical genre structures. Or you have suddenly Orson Welles or John Ford in The Simpsons. You don't have to know it, but in a way it's present. And I was thinking, which kind of, German cinematic moments are existing and were like consumed by other filmmakers and were repeated, spoofed, referenced. I don't know, do you have certain, pictures, scenes, references in other German movies who, have a reference to older movies and building, there's not from an administration, not from like schools and educational system, but from individuals who say, I make this little reference to this, and I love this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my question is, do you have examples?
The problem in Ankara is that you don't see too many German films. Biggest problem is that you also get, because of regional accesses and so online, not too many things. You need to hack it and go through VPNs and stuff like that, and tunnel stuff. But because of the Turkish context, it's like you realize that Fatih Akın does it in two directions. He does it with Turkish films and he does it with German films. So if what's her name? Hannah Güler. If she appears in his film,
Sure,
it's a total reference to Fassbinder, obviously, and it's like he's kneeling down to Fassbinder, but at the same time he's citing Turkish films, and the same picture, the same framing, the same place in Istanbul, the same thing. So the last years, I haven't seen a German film where I would say, yes, this is clearly referencing something. The only German films I can see here is when I go on the Ankara Film Festival and go into the series the Goethe Institute shows, and there is a generation selected where I'm too long away or so, where I don't make these direct connections anymore. But what happened on the other side is I was watching Netflix, a French series about a film, a star agency in Paris, a comedy sitcom, and you have in the sitcom you have Isabella Gianni, Julia Binouget, Monique Bellucci, You have them all appearing there, and they're all of a sudden so present, and some directors out of French cinema. And you feel like, wow, did I watch too much French cinema, or is this just all automatically coming? And with Germany, I don't get that. Yes, the films I have seen when I still was in Germany, or when I look at historical films, or when I look at this with this eye from the academician and media archaeology and all this kind of stuff, there is these connections. But if you ask me about the film from the last 3-4 years, I have to pass.
The only one probably could agree is the comedies of Bully Herbig. He tried to make something with Winnetou, but then on the other hand, I think that's interesting in Germany. You probably also still know it from film school. There's this dream of, I want to make a genre movie.
Yeah.
like science fiction or a westerner. And I thought, what is genre? It's a little bit connecting back to the end of the Second World War and the works which the Americans did to like build, to mediate Germany to a Western, at least West Germany. So East Germany was mediated by the Russians, but here in West Germany, the war for the minds and the hearts, how the Americans say it so nice. That's the moment where you implant the American genre into our views and our experiences so that they seem much more common. But a genre is like, for me, kind of like an extraction. So you have, like in biology, you have a lot of forms, and over the years, suddenly there's something like a Western or a thriller or film noir. And so it's like a condensation of kind of typical mythological elements of the specific story, in this case of America. And they have enormous attraction, especially when you put so much talent into it, that we should never forget that, in Germany, everybody is asking, when you make something with art, how can you live with it? And at least in America, people know, no, you have to give them fuckload of money at least to make something.
Okay, that's the American way of life, but that's also the way of teaching filmmaking, in the sense of the character development, character and action, and all this kind of stuff. So I think yes, with the first settlers, there comes in America this very Puritan element. Yeah?
Sure.
And you say, okay, we're Europeans in middle of Europe and Italian, Spain, and south of France. We stayed Catholic and in the magic realm of something else, or in the fog of the church, something there. But this Puritan attitude comes back, and everyone is a winner and something like that. And maybe what we haven't done is, like, when I was a kid, I watched all these Heinz Rühmann films and the Heinz Erhardt films, all the Heinz guys and stuff like that. But there's this connection we haven't done, is what is in the 1920s German cinema. What is the avant-garde, which is this kind of very strange experimental dealing with aesthetics and stuff like that, and that's gone. And now here in Ankara, a friend of mine is discovering all these Marshall films, the US brought in the 50s here. And there, I hadn't a chance to look at the boxes yet and at the reels, but there must be in many ways similar to what came to Germany at the end of the Second World War. As films and stuff like that. So there's this film education on the one side, but on the other side is also the fact that the Americans never need any kind of country outside for their film market. Yeah, they don't need us for distributing their films, because they make their money inside their own country. Because it's just huge, it's just incredible big, with screens without ending or something like that, and that's maybe the world for the Americans in that way. And then you don't have maybe enough screens in Germany enough to tell this kind of stories or something like that. It's crazy interesting, yeah. It's crazy interesting to follow up this whole kind of things, but it's getting more complicated in several ways. And the question is what to do now at the end. And the one idea of Lars Henrik, to come back to that, is to say, okay, let's fix some places, and that means he goes back on this dispositive cinema, which is an architecture. It's a building, you can go and you go away. So, and in that one, you would sit there on the beer and would reflect. Now I've seen Martha, which is a wonderful film. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah,
horrible, wonderful. Yeah.
It reminds me. Then there's this thing like I had this chance as an editor to cut some reverse material of Douglas Sirk interviews, and Douglas Sirk, when he was at film school and working with Fassbinder, but there was what's his name, Schmidt, who Ecki Schmidt, who did these interviews for TV with him and so on. So, and Douglas Sirk, who comes back then later as this old man and to look at that, but there is no catching up, because I mean there would be a chance that Germany is Germans are ideal melodramatic people, yeah.
Yeah, and
romantic, incredible romantic, yeah.
They really don't. Yeah, and they really don't like to talk so much.
Yeah, but they don't pick it up. And if Florian Henkel Donnersmarck, The Life of Others, and this is very clearly conceptualized on this American way of putting the character. How do you characterize it? And it sounds like Sid Field cooked over again in some matters, but not Sid Field. Maybe somebody who's more modern, more flexible in some ideas, has a little bit Vogel about story journey and stuff like that, and character journey. But I felt when I sing if I would catch up with a film in Germany, I would love melodrama again. Yeah, would it work in Germany? I know in Turkey it would work, because when people come out of cinema and you ask them how was the film, and they say I cried a lot, everyone wants to see the film. Yeah? But I don't know, in Germany I don't think you would ask people, did you cry in cinema? I don't know.
Coming back to the text of Lars Henrik Gass, he wrote another interesting little note, and it's about the age of people who are going to cinemas. And I had, because I'm not a great opera fan, so my motto is always, I only go into the opera when I get paid. So I got paid to, film 2 operas, Puccini and 1 Wagner, and one was in Chemnitz. And I remember we built everything up, the cameras, so it was not a big setup, 3 cameras. And then I went in the foyer to smoke a cigarette and wait in 10 minutes, people coming, the audience come in, and then we have to go ready to start filming. And I stand there, it was in the night, so the place before the opera, super nice people in Chemnitz also. And suddenly there's one figure who coming out of the dark, not fast, slow. Then another, I'm smoking, or what the fuck? Then my first association was like zombies, like coming, and then more and more. And then I was like, what the fuck? It was like an onslaught of old people, like 60s, 70s, but it felt like 90. And, they came all around, and I was, okay, I have to finish smoking. And what I mean, that the future of a culture is, and that's the sad truth, probably when you're in your 70s, and that's the art form you see, that won't have a lot of impact. It lost its power, its punch. Like, in the 18th century, you had Verdi, you had Puccini, you had Wagner. It was like a rock concert. So Wagner with his new sound system and Berlioz, it was also every time more and more. Yeah, no, we need an extra section of violins and more drums and more this. So you have this competition going. But today it's like you're sitting there and it's like, sure, it's like other old stuff, which you can like, but it won't change your mind. And so I found it interesting that the same with cinema, when you don't have, people, young people, like 14-year-old boys or girls, we have for the future, what the future will bring, it's, nothing brilliant what I'm saying now. You have to look what are kids when they're now 13 or 14, what do they like? What is the idea, what they want? And it's interesting, they were in England and America, so they want to be YouTube stars. So it's not anymore like I want to become a big director like Orson Welles, John Ford, or Fassbinder. No, it's like YouTube star or Instagram. And I found it super interesting because in the other part, I think, is games. So let's plays, all this universe. There's a big industry, but there's also a lot of talent. So every new algorithm. So there's kind of the state of the art in this big project, this A games. And suddenly when you see this enthusiasm, interest, not only the numbers, but just young kids who say that's something where I'm super fascinated, then I think we see the future. And in this sense, I would say, Henrik is right. Museum is the only option to reserve this memory, to also reserve the beauty and the greatness, so the treasure aspect. But we have new ways of distribution. We have new ways of camera. So when I want to make a movie, I can, at least art movies, when you look back, you say, you don't need so much. You know what I mean? It's not impossible, and you can distribute it. And suddenly what I found interesting, for example, there's a certain YouTube videos where people, young people, rewatch old movies, like what are the greatest horror movies, and they see Psycho or The Exorcist, and it's nice. It's, in a way, I was reminded, like, no, that's like film club. You know, people then commenting, saying, hey, it's next movie you have to see, you know, Texas Chain Massacre. That's really horrible, yeah? Or you have to look at Pasolini Salo, you won't stand it.
This, this last year, or this last term, while teaching here in Bilkent, I had two things. I taught again a course, History of Film and Media, with the students, and they are 21 years old, Turkish students, yeah, from literature and communications of that. It's absolutely fun. They are totally into it. They are active, live, discussing the films. And so we start really early and go through film, not film by film, but many, many different films and stuff like that. And they're quite open. Okay, the level is like this. You say like, okay, Griffiths is boring or something like that. But you were surprised what they have seen. I mean, I was surprised what kind of films they have seen and which genres. And when you mention some names, of course, some they don't know, and some they're immediately directly there.
Sure.
The other thing is that with all in this 20 years here, we collected so many different technical stuff, and it's all electronic and digital, DV or whatever, video formats, things like that. And it starts with 8mm, yeah. And we got this little Wolverine from the US, which just to copy 8mm films on SD cards or something like that.
Wolverine, what is Wolverine?
Wolverine is a machine, 8mm copy machine.
Ah, Wolverine, okay.
Wolverine, yeah, Wolverine. And the amazing thing is there's always a group of students in this little lab with the copy machines who is keen on working there. So they're spending lots of free time in there, and we have already now students who want to go back and shoot their films on film. So there's a kind of, this not nostalgia, but there's a kind of
acknowledgement of material
and touch of that. Yeah. So what is this cassettes and stuff like that? So it's somehow amazing in that way, because it's also a surprise, because I wouldn't expect this generation to get so much interested into that stuff, but it's there and they use it. Yeah, not many, but some of them, and that's why this museum has to be something lively. It has to give these options that you experience and that you can do something with it.
Sie verlassen nun Inkubator Nummer 7. Versuchen Sie sich nicht zu wehren. Sie können ein verbessertes und fortschrittlicheres menschliches Wesen sein. In 3 Sekunden wird die 1-7 RAM-Sequenz finalisiert. Jetzt!